Hey guys, what's up? It's Karl here, back with another episode, and we've got a heavy one in this studio. It took a bit longer to get in here. My car is not meant for heavy lifting. It's the brand new 2020 27-inch iMac. It just got released the other day. It's here in the flesh. We have one of the best specs. Let's get this out of the box and of course take a look at what Apple is offering for their desktop. So the box art hasn't actually changed from last year. It's actually the same wallpaper that we saw. If we can quickly, this slides out. We've got the keyboard up top. Styrofoam. We of course have the power cable. All the accessories are in the inside, and this is one of my favorite parts. And aesthetically, you can see that there isn't too much changing in the form factor or the design of the 27-inch. Of course, comes in silver. If you do want space gray, you'll have to grab the iMac Pro. And it's been years since we've seen a design change in the iMac series. And my prediction, when they come out with Apple Silicone, that's when we'll see a brand new design. Of course, we'll see thinner bezels. That's obviously a must. And I'm not really too sure what else they can do to the back. Everything is nicely packed in. The finishing is top notch. Obviously, Apple is known for that. Maybe something I'd love to see in a future iteration is an upgrade to the stand. Of course, you can still tilt it this way, but you can't, of course, adjust the height. The easiest way to do that is to stack it up on a couple of books. That's a bit of a pity if you're spending anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000 on a new machine, but you know, that option is up to you. The I/O ports, of course, on the back, you've got a headphone jack, SD card slot, 4 USB ports, 2 USB-C ports, and of course, Ethernet. Power cable still runs through the back through this nice machined hole, and still the nice thing, I love to see that you can still swap out the RAM in 2020. So you can stack this up all the way up to 128 gigs, I believe, if you choose the top spec. My model here has 32 gigs of RAM, but in a year to two, if I decide to upgrade that to say 64, I always have that option to swap that out. The big change, or I guess the big option that you'll notice this year, you can kind of see it already in my model, is the Nano-texture display. And to simply explain that, it's Apple's version of a matte display. We've seen that in their Pro Display XDR. It's the first time that it's coming to the iMac series, and it costs $500 extra to get a matte finish. And what that does is help a ton in glare reduction. And I've got my big studio lights on. I've got big windows off to the side, and already on camera, I can already see that there is barely any glare off of this. Most matte displays are created by putting a chemical compound on the screen, but that really reduces contrast ratios. The screen doesn't feel as vibrant. Apple has done something completely different. They've actually etched into the display to help with that light reflection. And if you had a magnifying glass and zoomed up close enough, you could probably see that. To the naked eye though, it looks completely smooth and finished. Let's get this guy booted up though. We'll kind of do a ton of testing and we'll explain more what other hardware changes we have to the iMac. Okay, so inside of the box, designed by California in Apple. And this is actually the first time I've seen the Magic Trackpad in white. Didn't know that this was an option. We had the classic silver, of course the space gray with the iMac Pro, and it's a nice touch. Magic keyboard with, of course, the numpad, and the Magic mouse to complete the accessories. I think I'll swap this with a Logitech mouse. And pressing the power button on the back. And the first thing that I've noticed from the display, and I've chosen a very vibrant and saturated wallpaper, you don't lose any of the colors. It still looks really good. And like I mentioned, I've got really bright studio lights in here, some very big windows. You can still see all of the detail, and I don't see too much glare from the screen. And as the most unscientific test ever, I should technically have another iMac with a non-nano-texture display. I've got my iPhone here, and you can see as I tilt it from side to side, it catches lights from both my studio here and off to this side from the window. And that's just a regular piece of glass. There's nothing coating it, and we get none of that on the iMac. So that really leads you to the choice, is it worth it to get this nano-texture display? It's $500, so it's definitely pricey. I think that choice really comes down to personal preference. Are you in a room with a ton of natural light, or you can see a lot of glare? Are you staring at your computer for 7, 8, maybe even 9 hours a day? That glare can really bother you. Here in the studio, it makes a lot of sense to me. I'm working here during the day, but if you're in a darker room, perhaps just having the standard glass is also an option. And I get it, 500 bucks, it's expensive. Let's though go through the rest of the specs of this device. And of course, the other thing that I really noticed with this display is the chunky bezels. Especially now in 2020, we've been blessed with the 16-inch MacBook Pro. Bezels have been reduced. They are still very, very large on the iMac. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I can already see Apple's thought process here. When Apple Silicon comes, they're gonna introduce the newly designed iMac. They're gonna say, look how pretty this thing looks, look how good it looks. Why would you want an Intel-based iMac? Performance might be very similar when you can have a newer design, looks better, and of course, probably slightly better performance with Apple Silicon. It's almost like a double-handed backslap from Apple to Intel. It makes sense, and honestly, if I were Apple, I'd probably do the same thing too. Internally, we're getting the 10th gen Intel Core processors. You can spec it with either a 6, 8, or now the highest spec, a 10 core. You can go all the way up to 128 gigs of RAM, which I think is a bit silly. This one has the sweet spot at 32 gigs. Remember, you can always change that or swap that out after the fact. You are stuck though with your hard drive choice option. The lowest spec is 512 gigs. You can once again get very silly, spec it all the way up to 8 terabytes. Since we are talking about a desktop here, my recommendation, get the lowest spec, 1 terabyte or even 512, and you can always get an external hard drive that just lives somewhere on the desk. Yes, you will see a cable, but you're saving hundreds of dollars, and you can use that money to, say, upgrade the GPU. We've got a big change in that as well this year. The base and medium spec will only get you the Radeon Pro 5300M that has 4 gigs of VRAM, but if you choose the top spec, you can get all the way up to 16 gigs of VRAM. That's the 5700 XT, and that will actually get you 6 times better graphic performance than a graphics card with only 8 gigs of VRAM. So if you're a top spec user, if you're someone that's perhaps eyeing the iMac Pro or say even the Mac Pro, but still want an all-in-one form factor, you're into heavy 8K, maybe even 6K red footage, that would be my option. And I'll go through now my recommended spec for the 27-inch iMac for most of you guys out there. I would honestly skip the Nano-texture. It's 500 bucks, that's a quarter of the price. I'd honestly rather spend the extra money on the processor, so I've gone with the 10th core 10th gen. That's an i9. RAM-wise, stick at 16, maybe if you can squeak by the 32 gigs, but remember, you can always replace that after the fact. Storage-wise, keep it at 512. You can always add that external hard drive if necessary. You probably don't need 10 gigabit Ethernet. Magic Trackpad, I'd add it. I'm a big fan. I use it a ton with my video editing. Of course, the mouse, I'd swap that out for a Logitech, and that total cost will come to $2,749. Remember, you can spec this out to the 9s. You can technically do 128 gigs of RAM, but that's honestly overkill. 2,700, 3,000 is the perfect spec for an iMac. Additional big changes coming to the iMac hardware-wise is actually this little guy right up top, and that's the front-facing camera. With the amount of time people are now working from home, I know that Zoom chats or video calls are all the rage. People spend 5 to 6 hours a day in meetings. Having a proper front-facing camera, I know, is pretty important. It is finally a 1080p camera. That's nothing to cry home about, but they've made the upgrade to make it at least decent. It's usable. It doesn't look like you're talking with a potato half the time. It's also a backlit sensor though, so it does help bring in a lot more natural light in. And they've also made some pretty big improvements to the microphone, and that's the same audio improvements that we've seen from the 16-inch MacBook Pro that are now built into the iMac. So video and voice quality should be a lot better now. And that is pretty much the upgrades coming to the 2020 27-inch iMac. Let me know your thoughts down below. Are you going to grab one, or are you going to wait for that new design, which I'm positive we will see sometime early next year? Now, thinking about it, we might even see that new design coming to the iMac Pro first, because that is now a bit old. Performance on this has been great. I've edited this very video. It has handled 4K footage like a breeze, and it's honestly better than my now 2-year-old iMac Pro. So this will be my current replacement, probably until we see Apple Silicon come around. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this quick unboxing and of course review, and I will catch the rest of you in one of my next ones or in one of my vlogs. Peace.